Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Perek Dalet Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shifra, Minuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Leavdil ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, בתור שעה חולי ישראל, and החלמה מרב בנימין אור ציון חי ben דבורה. Food cannot become tameh unless it is first prepared, hechshel for tumah. It is prepared when it comes in contact with one of 7 liquids: dew, water, wine, olive oil, blood, milk, and honey, and the owner of the food is pleased with the contact. Once it has been prepared, it can become tameh at any time, even after it is dry. When olives are pickled in salt, some liquid oozes out of them and wets their surface. This liquid is classified as olive oil. It is not actually oil, but is considered to be oil in the context of these laws. Therefore, its contact with the olives should prepare them, meaning make them capable of becoming tameh. This Mishnah discusses whether we assume that the owner is pleased with the contact or not. Chavit shel zetim migulgalim. If someone has a barrel of olives pickling in salt, meaning he's pickling the olives to sweeten them, Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Enot tzrich lenakev, he does not have to make a hole in the barrel to show that he wants to be rid of the liquid, because it is assumed in any event that he does not want the liquid to be on the olives. Therefore, even if he does nothing, the liquid does not prepare the olives for tumah. Since the owner intends to eat the olives, it may be assumed that he has no interest in the liquid that oozes out of them. However, Bet Hillel say, tzrich lenakev, he does have to make a hole in the barrel because he must actively show that he does not want the liquid to be there. If he takes no such action, we cannot assume that he is opposed to the liquid being on the olives, and therefore the olives are prepared for tumah. Now, Bet Hillel agree in the following case, umodim shim nikeva ustamua shmarim. She Torah, however, Bet Hillel agreed that if he did make a hole in the barrel, but sediment from the olives blocked the liquid from draining out, it is tahor, meaning the olives cannot become tameh. Since the owner made a hole and therefore showed that he did not want the liquid, the olives are not prepared for tumah, even if the hole is blocked later. The next dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel is about tameh oil and how it can become purified. Usually, immersion in a mikveh works only to purify people and utensils and not foods or liquids. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel considered the law of tameh oil that was on a person's body when he immersed himself. Hasach b'shemen tahor, if someone spread tahor oil on himself, and itma then became tameh and transmitted tumah to the oil, yarad v'taval, and then went down into a mikveh and immersed himself to purify himself from the tumah. Bet Shammai rim, Bet Shammai say, afal pi shu minatef tahor. Even if he is dripping with oil after the immersion and it was not absorbed into his skin, the oil is tahor because it is treated as part of his body and therefore became tahor through the immersion of his body. Regardless of how much oil there is on the person, it is tahor. However, Bet Hillel say, kedei sichat ever katan, if just a small amount of oil remains on him, meaning enough to spread over a small limb, meaning the smallest limb for which it would be used, which is the little toe of a day-old child, it is negligible in relation to his body. It is therefore regarded as part of his body, and the immersion of the body works for the oil as well. But if there is a greater amount of oil present, it is too important in its own right to be deemed part of his body, and therefore remains tameh despite the immersion. In the previous case, the person spread tahor oil on his body and then he became tameh, making the oil tameh. In the following case, the oil was tameh before he put it on himself. If the oil was tameh from the start, before he put on himself, the maximum amount of oil that can become tahor is smaller. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, kedei sichat evel katan, if after his immersion enough oil remains on him to smear on a small limb, it is treated as part of his body and was therefore purified by his immersion. A larger amount, however, would remain tameh. Bet Hillel omrim, but Bet Hillel say, mashket tofech, if the oil on his body can moisten that which touches it, the immersion makes it tahor, but a larger amount, such as the amount required to spread over a small limb, remains tameh. When something is tameh, it has a certain significance that makes it stand out from other things. Therefore, in our case, if the oil was already tameh when it was applied to the person's body, it cannot be regarded as negligible unless the amount is very small. According to Bet Shammai, the maximum amount of oil that can be considered negligible in this case is enough to rub on a small limb, the position that Bet Hillel held in the case where the oil was originally tahor. And according to Bet Hillel, the maximum is even smaller, enough to moisten a person's palm, meaning the amount of oil is such that if someone would touch it with the palm of his hand, the palm would come away wet. According to a different version of Bet Hillel's last ruling, the maximum that can become tahor is greater. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Bet Hillel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Bet Hillel, Tofech u'matfiach, if the body is so moist with oil that a hand that touches it can then moisten something else, the oil is tahor. Even this amount of oil is considered negligible in relation to the body and is therefore purified by the immersion. Meaning if someone would touch it with the palm of his hand and then touch that palm against his other palm, the second palm would become moist. This amount is larger than the maximum stated above in the name of Bet Hillel, the amount that can moisten one palm, but it is smaller than the maximum allowed by Bet Shammai, enough to spread over a small limb. And the Rav tells us that Halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is then of Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin records 3 disputes where Bet Shammai ruled more leniently than Bet Hillel in regard to marriage and divorce. The first of these disputes, which also appears in Kiddushin chapter 1, Mishnah 1, teaches that one of the ways to perform Kiddushin betrothal is for the man to give the woman or money or an object of some value for the purpose of betrothal. Now, 2 acts are needed for a marriage to fully take effect, Kiddushin and Nisu'in. The first act, Kiddushin, can be performed by the groom giving the bride money or an object that is worth money, such as a ring. This makes them legally married in most ways. For example, intimacy between the bride and another man is adultery. The bride must be formally divorced with a get before she may marry anyone else. However, they are forbidden to live together as husband and wife until Nisu'in, which is usually performed by both of them going under the bridal canopy. In earlier times, the 2 acts were performed a long time apart, often a year or more. Nowadays, they are done one after another in a single ceremony. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel disagree as to how much the money or object must be worth. Aisha mitkadeshet b'dinar uv'shevet dinar k'divrei Bet Shammai. A woman can be betrothed with a dinar. The dinar was a commonly used coin made of silver, or something worth a dinar, according to the opinion of Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel omrim, but Bet Hillel say b'pruta uv'shaveh pruta. A woman can be betrothed even with a pruta, the smallest coin, or something worth a pruta. The pruta was a small copper coin. There are 192 perutot in a dinar. The value of a pruta is the smallest amount of money that has any significance. Anything less is not considered money. Bet Hillel's ruling is stricter than Bet Shammai's ruling because if Kiddushin were performed with any amount between a pruta and a dinar, Bet Hillel would rule that the Kiddushin is valid and makes the woman forbidden to all other men unless she is formally divorced or the husband dies. The kamei pruta, and how much is a pruta worth? Echad mishmona beisar itanki, 1/8 of an Italian isar, and the isar was a silver coin. The next dispute, which is also found in Gittin, chapter 8, Mishnah 4, deals with the laws of divorce. A husband divorces his wife by delivering a get, a divorce document to her. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Poter hu et ishto beget yashan. A man may divorce his wife with an old get. Bet Hillel osrin, but Bet Hillel forbid it. Ezeu get yashan, and what is an old get? Kol sheniteched ima achar shekitavo la. Any get that he wrote for his wife and he then spent time alone with her before he gave it to her. According to Bet Hillel, a husband may not divorce his wife with such a get because of the concern that he may have had marital relations with her when they were alone together and she then conceived and will give birth to a child. Since people assume that a get is given on the date written in it, they would think that the child was conceived out of wedlock after they were divorced. He might have held the get for a long time, perhaps as long as a year or 2 before giving it, and so the child was born long after the date written in the get. People would then not want to marry this child when he grows up, while there was no problem to marry a child conceived by a man and woman who were not married as long as they were permitted to marry each other. It is still considered a defect. Therefore, many people will not want to marry the child. Bet Hillel therefore required that they use a new get with a new date so that it will be clear that the child was conceived before they were divorced. Bet Shammai, however, are not concerned about this possibility because they assume that after writing the get, he would not have marital relations with her. This is because Bet Shammai hold in Gittin chapter 9, Mishnah 10, that a man may divorce his wife only if she commits adultery. Since he wrote her a get, she must have committed adultery, and if she did, he would be disgusted with her and not want to have relations with her, even if they are alone together. But Bet Hillel hold that a man may divorce his wife for any reason, therefore he might still have relations with her even after deciding to divorce her. Even Bet Hillel prohibit using such a get only where it is possible to use a different one. However, if the husband already divorced her with an old get and then left the country, she may remarry based on the old get. The third dispute in our Mishnah, which appears in Gittin chapter 8, Mishnah 9, also involves laws of divorce. If someone divorced his wife and witnesses later saw that she spent the night alone with him in an inn, the witnesses, however, did not see what they did once they were alone. Bet Shammai say, and not get sheni. She does not need a second get from him. We do not assume that he remarried her by having marital relations with her for the sake of kiddushin. One of the ways in which a man can betroth a woman is by having marital relations with her for the sake of kiddushin, like it says in chapter 1, Mishnah 1 of Masechet Kiddushin. Since the witnesses did not see them engaging in relations, we do not assume that they did. Therefore, even if they did engage in such relations for the purpose of kiddushin, it did not take effect, because an act of kiddushin does not take effect unless there are witnesses to it, as it says in Kiddushin, page 65a. Since these witnesses do not know whether they had relations together, there are no witnesses to the Kiddushin. As we mentioned, Bet Shammai do not allow a man to divorce his wife unless she committed adultery, in which case he probably would not want to have relations with her again. Therefore, even if we see them being alone together, we cannot assume that they had relations. Bet Hillel say, she needs a second get from him because we assume that he had relations with her. Bet Hillel allow a man to divorce his wife for any reason, therefore there is no reason for him not to want to have relations with her. Since they were alone together, we assume that they did indeed have relations with each other. In the words of the Gemara, the witnesses who see them being alone together are the witnesses to they're having relations together. Since a person generally does not want to act sinfully, we assume that he intended this action to be for the sake of remarrying her, because the witnesses can assume this is what happened. It is as if they witnessed the act of kiddushin, and the man and woman are considered married. Therefore, if she wishes to marry someone else, she must receive another get from him. And the Mishnah qualifies Bet Hillel's ruling. Ematai, when do Bet Hillel say she needs a get? Bisman she'itgarsha min nisuin, only when she was divorced from him after they completed their marriage with nisuin and were living together as man and wife. Since they had relations with each other when they were married, they are familiar with each other and not embarrassed to be intimate even after they are divorced. But if she was divorced from him during the betrothal stage of marriage, when the couple is not yet permitted to live together, Bet Hillel agree that she does not need a second get from him just because they were alone together after the divorce. Because during the Erusin stage of marriage, he is not yet comfortable with her and he is embarrassed to have marital relations with her. Therefore, even Bet Hillel agree that we cannot assume they had relations with each other just because they were alone together. Since the witnesses cannot assume that they had relations together, even if they did have relations, the Kiddushin will not take effect because there were no witnesses to it. And that is on the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.